Running. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Retro Warriors episode 258. As always, I'm your host, Justin Baker, and as always, I'm joined by resident old bastard, Chris Saturn.
Hello.
Hello, Saturn, we have
Hello.
housekeeping.
Housekeeping.
First up, the shows are still remote, and I'm going to stop talking about it now. Next up, there are timestamps. If you want to jump straight to the topic at hand, check for timestamps that hopefully I put there. And if I didn't, then maybe the fluff is just really good and you should listen to it anyway. I don't know. Maybe try it. Or write me an email and I'll tell you where the timestamp is.
And make sure that you're typing profanities at Justin the entire time until the topic.
Dear Retro Warriors, this letter is the length of time that you've wasted from my life, and I shall be returning the favor.
Yes.
Also, this is our thank you show where we thank all of the wonderful people who support us financially over at patreon.com/Retro Warriors, where they get all kinds of cool things and extra stuff. So in return, they make us say horrible things that they allege are their names, but I'm starting to suspect that some of them may not actually be names.
Which ones?
I know. The ones that are paragraphs.
Huh. Weird.
My week,
Yes, sir.
I have been playing Clubhouse games. I picked up the new Clubhouse games on Switch, which is very fun.
Have you played Yacht Dice yet?
I've not played Yacht Dice.
Well, then what are you even doing with your life?
I've been playing a lot of billiards on it and a lot of chess on it, and it's really fun. It's basically like the video game equivalent of those like 50-in-1 board game boxes you get at Target. That's like, it's got checkers and Chinese checkers and chess and other chess. It's Connect 4. Like, it's just got.
Oh, they can't say Connect 4.
Right, four
in a row.
They do, 4 in a row. They just got whatever crammed in there.
Right.
But the interface is very nice, and it's very nice software to interact with, which sounds silly, I know, but it does make it enjoyable. It also has some multiplayer tank games, and my wife can play multiplayer with me with the little companion app. She doesn't have to own the game.
Nice.
And it supports touchscreens, so we can like lay it down on the dinner table and play Mancala just with the touchscreen, and our real Mancala board can just get thrown in the trash because we've reached a new digital future where I use laser swords in VR to flail around at songs, and we play Mancala on a touchscreen.
You know you've reached adulthood when you and your wife just play Mancala on the kitchen table every now and then.
We do. We play a lot of Mancala. It's probably we probably enjoy Mancala like together more than any other game.
Nice.
Because she's not really into board games or whatever, and I like kind of strategic stuff, even though I think it's technically a solved game. But I'm too dumb to remember the correct moves, so it's not solved for me.
Right? I can barely handle the solutions to tic-tac-toe.
And it's got like just weird stuff like Three Man's Morris and like a bunch of weird card games and 2 versions of shogi, like the big one and the little one.
Yeah.
And it's just really cool. It's cool software. If you like kind of like classic games, then it's a lot of fun, and definitely something that like I could see getting busted out at like Thanksgiving, or if someone I know is like, hey, let me check out your Switch, but they're not really like into video games, because oddly enough, that seems to be a thing. The Switch has this sort of Wii appeal where a lot of people are like, I don't really play games, but that looks cool.
Yeah.
And it's nice to give them something that's not like, here's Breath of the Wild, and here's your controls chart, and what you're going to want to do is watch out for your weapon degradation. And they're like, I'm done. I don't want to do this.
You mean you don't want to introduce them with 1-2 Switch?
No, I don't want to own 1-2 Switch.
I do.
I also picked up Command & Conquer Remastered.
Nice.
Now, EA is still on my do not buy list, but the game was developed by Petroglyph Games, who I do like a lot, and they are on my buy it immediately list after Conan Unchained, which I think is still in early access. But I picked it up, and I was not a Command & Conquer fan before. I played some of Red Alert once, and I played some of one of the PlayStation ports,
Ugh.
I think.
Gross.
And that was it. So I've never booted up the campaign. I've never that was my Command and Conquer playtime before Tiberium Wars, I think, which is the third one.
Tiberian Sun.
How was Tiberium? Whatever it was, the third one.
Yeah.
That was after these ones, the modern-ish one that came out in like 2005 or 6 or something.
Was that 3?
I thought it was 3.
I guess there was like 7 games before 3.
It had this really edgy green and black looking front cover. I remember that. So whichever one that was, I played a bunch of that one, but that was just kind of more modern and different and not quite as kitschy and weird and dumb as the old ones.
I guess they did call that one Command and Conquer 3, despite the fact that there was like a half dozen games before it.
Yeah. And so this is my first time really putting any time into classic Command and Conquer. And man, what a great remaster. Tons and tons of content. The interface is great. It's got that thing that we like where you can press a button and switch between old and new graphics, like on the fly, which is the dumbest feature, but
I'll take it every time.
I've been really enjoying it. It's been a very good collection. It includes allegedly, and again, I'm not a fan of the series, so if they've missed some egregious thing that like, oh, you got to have this content and they forgot it, then I wouldn't know it. But it seems to have everything, all the expansions, some extra packs and mission packs and stuff that were released, as well as the console content from the console ports, I believe, are also in the remaster. Weird. So if you are an RTS fan, then it's $20 for a really good RTS from a studio that I really enjoy. Mm-hmm. Also, EA's in there somewhere.
Yeah.
Or if you're a Command and Conquer fan, then absolutely get it. Right. It's real good.
What if the only Command and Conquer game you're a fan of is Renegade?
I don't know what that is, so I'm going to say yes.
It was the FPS.
Yeah, I'm just going to say yes anyway. The only other thing I played was Daikatana.
Oh God, I saw a notification pop up on my screen from GOG that was like, Justin's online playing Daikatana, and I was like, what the fuck is happening now?
You're like, I knew it. He does like shitty games. Fucking knew it. No, I was just sitting on my computer and I had it installed because I'll go through these whims where I'm like, I want to have all my games installed, and I'll just install like 70 games, and then I'll go, I want to have a hard drive space, and I'll delete them all.
Right.
And I installed Daikatana just because I'd never played it, and I was like, how bad could it really be? I mean, really, how bad is it? And I booted it up, and I was like, oh, it's unplayable on modern computers. This sucks. And I went and I downloaded the HD patch, and I got everything working in full HD and up-res. It looked great. And I played it for like 1 minute, and I was like, why am I fucking shooting like tiny, regular-sized bugs and frogs with a laser gun? And then I quit.
Yeah. That's the correct response to Daikatana.
I don't really know. I don't know what the hell happened there. But it was a thing.
Nice.
But that's been about it for me.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up because I meant to mock you for that one way or another. So
well, there's your chance.
I'm glad we got that in there. No, for me, still playing Trails of Cold Steel 3. And I don't want to go super deep into it because I know that it'll just bore you to tears. But I did.
I'm interested. Every time you talk about it, I'm like, this sounds fun.
Yeah.
And then I remember, I'm like, no, Justin, it doesn't. You hate that stuff.
Right.
Stop it. Like it's like you trick me with your fucking trickery.
Well, so the way that the battle system works in pretty much all the games in the series is that you can see the turn order on the side of the screen, and there's occasionally turn bonuses that'll just if your character or the enemy character lands on that turn, they get a bonus, and some of them's like recover half of your total health. And some of them are like instantly lose all of your skill points. Shit like that. And I was fighting the hardest boss that I've played in any of the games in the series so far. Like, it was seriously kicking my ass. And the win condition that tells you at the beginning of the battle is get the boss to 70% health. So I only had to chip away 30%, and it was just decimating me. Like, I was on my 4th or 5th retry. Now I'm finally like right there, and I'm realizing I'm about to actually finally win this fight. Then I notice the boss is coming up next, and it's a 50% health recharge. And I'm like, you motherfucker, you're not doing that to me. And then I finally remembered the mechanic that's been in all of the games so far that I keep forgetting about, which is a special ability you can use that interrupts the turn order and lets you go immediately.
Yeah.
And I finally finished that fucking fight that should have been
Yeah,
so
it kind
easy.
of seems like they assumed you had been doing that the whole time, huh?
Yeah, it made me realize that a lot of the hard boss fights would have been a lot easier if I remembered all the mechanics in the game.
A lot of the 700 hours of these games you've played would be real nice.
Yeah, if only I would remember that all these mechanics were there. But yeah, and then immediately afterwards was a story event that possibly killed somebody important, and I can't tell because they won't go back to that character to let me know what happened, and it's fucking driving me insane.
Well, let's jump into some news.
Yes.
First up, Australian court issues 2.4 million, that's American dollars, it's 3.5 million Australian dollars, fine to Sony for refusing refunds on faulty or broken digital games. Again, games that do not fucking work.
Right. Yeah.
Sony said, no, you bought it, you rubes.
Yeah.
It's on you.
Also, I believe it's pronounced dollary dues.
Is that what
It's not Australian dollars, it's dollary dues.
So, God, Sony, just
Yeah.
fuck you, man.
Good job, Sony.
Maxis's business tool Sim Refinery has been recovered and made available.
Yeah, and if you haven't read about this already, so Maxis, after the success of SimCity, was commissioned to make a bunch of tools for like private industries to simulate their industry to help teach new employees how their industry works. And one of them was this Sim Refinery game that was given to, I think, oil companies to show how their refineries and everything function. And it's been found in a working state. Somebody loaded it up in DOSBox and it works.
This seems like one of those things that like some guy would be like, oh yeah, I interned at this like oil refinery company for a couple months back in the early 90s. And I swear to God, I played a version of SimCity where you made oil refineries. And for years, his friends have been like, fuck, Steve, no, you fucking didn't, dude. They didn't make an oil refinery version of SimCity for your company, you idiot. And then now this has come out and he's like, my vindication! Like,
yeah, that seems like exactly what happened.
I like to imagine that somewhere out there, some guy's like, it is real. Like, you know?
Yeah, he just found Sim Refinery in that Voltar machine.
Investors on Activision Blizzard's board of directors argue that Bobby Kotick is paid too much. Did they just notice?
Yeah, right? I think he's been on the most overpaid CEOs list in America for a few years now.
I am okay with him getting a pay cut.
Right? Seriously.
Next up, Microsoft apparently not providing digital codes with console bundles going forward. Games will instead be tied to the hardware.
And they don't know if this is definitive, all the bundles going forward, but at least the Cyberpunk bundle that just came out, apparently you get no code in the box for the game, but the first time you power up the system and log in, it asks, do you want to redeem the game to your account? And if you say yes, it immediately redeems it. And if not, then it waits for the next user to log in, and it asks if you want to redeem it to that account.
Interesting.
So I assume that will put a similar timer on those codes, which the codes are already got an expiration date on them.
Right. I mean, it's not like they're removing a little bit more of your consumer rights.
Right.
Just a lot of it was already gone.
Yeah. You can't resell them now, obviously. But
or give them to friends if you already have the game or whatever.
That's what makes it difficult, is it's harder to give it to friends. You'd have to have the friend come over and log into your console to get it.
Saturn, it almost seems like they want us all to buy games instead of sharing with each other.
What assholes.
But that would be fucking stupid.
That's why I buy physical.
Take-Two says Google overpromised on Stadia, specifically referring to the technology and the hardware. Yep. You don't say Take-Two. And CD Projekt Red says that Stadia release of Cyberpunk 2077 will be sometime after the PS4, Xbox One, and PC launch.
Man, you should have seen how salty the people were on the Stadia subreddit when that announcement
came out. I like that you still go to the Stadia subreddit. It's got to just be a garbage fire at this point.
It's like the slowest moving train wreck ever. And I feel so bad.
Are they slowly realizing that it's a shit abandoned platform already?
So most of them still try to defend it as if it is the future of gaming and try to act
And we
like
just
it is
haven't
succeeding.
realized it yet.
Yeah, they haven't realized it all. They act like it's still succeeding and it is a complete success. But then when that article came out about Cyberpunk, like all of them were like, well, I guess I'm going to buy it on PC. If they keep this up, I don't know how Stadia is going to survive much longer. like that was the one that you finally realized? Like you didn't notice all this other shit?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Whatever.
But I will say that after that reveal of the PS5, I didn't see a single game there that wouldn't have worked on Stadia. So that might have been the best news for Google yet, was that PS5 reveal.
UK considering classifying loot boxes correctly as gambling.
Like they should.
So that's, please
Right.
do it.
And then the rest of
Everyone
the
do
nations
it.
of the world, please follow suit.
Minecraft Dungeons unseats Animal Crossing as top-selling eShop game after 3 months. And as much as Nintendo and Microsoft have a good relationship these days, at least publicly, it's got a sting that a Microsoft game is topping your eShop charts,
I don't know. They
dethroning your first-party game.
Nintendo did pretty heavily push Minecraft Dungeons too. So
Well, that's good. I've been playing the game. It's a really good dungeon crawler.
Yeah.
If you like dungeon crawlers, I thought I'd be kind of turned off because I don't really care about Minecraft like
Right.
as an aesthetic.
Yeah.
But you just kind of forget that it's Minecraft.
Right.
You're just like, that's blocky dungeon. It's block Diablo. It's great. Nintendo admits that data breach was worse than initially reported and may have affected over 300,000 users
Great.
in one of the shittiest moves that a company can possibly do.
one of my accounts was affected.
Thanks, Nintendo.
I got an email from Nintendo last weekend, I think, saying that my my Japanese account that I use to download Japanese games was suddenly logged into from Internet Explorer in Russia. So that was good. It's nice.
Hey, Russian hackers, don't use Internet Explorer.
Right? Seriously, of anything.
Also, how are you still using Internet Explorer? And like, what? How do you still have? What are you on Windows XP?
It's still on Windows 10. It's there.
Oh God!
It's just not default.
Okami artist pitching an Okami sequel to Capcom, hoping to get Platinum Games involved.
And every news
been a hot
organization ran the story as Okami 2 announced.
Yeah, that's how all of them worded it exactly. Yes, which this wouldn't be the first Okami sequel. There was a DS version, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was a spin-off, Okami Den.
Yeah.
I don't remember if it was DS or 3DS. I think it was DS.
Yeah. SNK planning new Metal Slug console and smartphone games for 2020 release. This is a rumor that I saw crop up on Twitter is where it came from. I'm not excited.
Yeah?
Because of the Metal Slug games, 50% of them are good games.
Mhm.
And their previous mobile game was one of the more disgusting cash grabs I've seen. Now, I'm excited where SNK is in a good spot right now.
Yeah.
They're really on the uptick, but I'm not ready to I'd love to see Metal Slug get the new Samurai Showdown treatment that
Right.
they've got going on, but I'm not convinced that they're going to do it, so I'm still kind of nervous.
What if they give it
about
the Contra Rogue Core treatment?
No, thanks. No, I'm okay. You know, it'd be really good for a run and gun. Timers on your guns before you can shoot again.
Right?
Perfect.
Put a cooldown timer on there.
Ship it.
Yeah.
Steam database data mining reveals possible upcoming release for Persona 4 Golden and Persona 3, which is
nice.
exciting
Yeah.
for Persona fans.
Right. Yeah, I probably won't play them. But it's nice that
Yeah.
they're available.
I've tried to play 2, 4, and 5, and I don't think they're for me. But
I have bought all of the main series Persona games as they've come out, and and every time I tell myself this is the one that I'm going to get into because I should enjoy them. I like JRPGs. I like things with like a horror theme to it, and the whole.
You love High
SMT
School?
series. I do. That's why I'm still there. That's why I never graduated.
Well, that's not why you're still there, but you know.
Oh yeah. Also because I'm a big stupid idiot. No. But no, like on paper, I should enjoy the Persona series, and every time I try to play one of them, like I'll enjoy it for like 2 or 3 hours, and then I run out of time to do something. Like I run out of hours in a day to accomplish all the things that I want to in the game, and I
Yeah.
get just frustrated enough that I set it down and don't ever come back to it.
Yeah. Konami and Hamster make Sunset Riders available on PS4 and Switch as part of the Arcade Archives series.
Nice.
So that's a good one.
Yeah.
I always mix it up with the other Western
Wild Guns?
Wild Guns.
Yes.
Constantly.
Different
Totally
game.
not Wild Guns.
Very different.
Alex Kidd in Miracle World DX announced for all major platforms with a Q1 2021 release. Like Wonder Boy and Streets of Rage, Sega is not set to develop or publish. Do we know who is developing it?
So it was an independent studio, a newer studio that was developing it, and they seem to have quite a bit of love for the game and the franchise. The publisher, if I remember right, was the same publisher that did Streets of Rage.
Oh, I'm okay with that. Yeah.
So we'll see.
Atari no-shows to court over VCS non-payment case.
Yeah.
Claims that 500 units may ship in June 2020.
Who knows?
So their hardware architect is stating that they didn't pay him. And so they're in litigation right now. And they just fucking didn't show up to court.
Nope.
Like it's fucking 1980 Atari and they have that kind of clout.
Yeah, and I think this
they can just do that.
I think this was an appeals case too. I think like one of the judges had already ruled in favor of the guy. And this was an appeal or something. Or maybe this was just a judgment for the previous ruling or something. I don't know, but they just didn't bother to show up.
Fuck you, Atari.
Right? Which
I'm
Atari?
calling it Atari VCS is Phantom 2.0. Just you wait.
Right.
Resident Evil series becomes Capcom's first to break 100 million in unit sales.
Nice.
So I'm kind of weirded out they hadn't made it that far yet.
Right? You'd think that Street Fighter would have made there.
Yeah.
With how many
sure.
Street Fighters there are.
I know. Google accidentally released year-old E3 alpha build of upcoming Ubisoft release on Stadia.
This is possibly one of my favorite stories.
How did it end up there? What even happened?
Not only that, but they released it with a name for the game that is not the name that it had then or the name that Ubisoft is planning to release it under.
I like to imagine they just have, like, Stadia is so shitty now that they have one guy that's like, hey, Craig, you gotta go put the new Stadia game up. And he just, like, grabs a DVD and is like, okay, and goes to upload it.
What I want to know is, how did a year-old E3 alpha build of the game work on Stadia?
I don't. Yeah, it seems like they would have had to optimize it a little bit. Like, was their optimization team, like, did they get the wrong file? And they were like, well, this doesn't look right, but we're going to do our jobs.
Right.
And, like, no one caught it.
And apparently the game isn't even scheduled to come out for a few months.
Finally, AT&T looking for buyer for Warner Brothers games.
How many times is Warner going to get into and then leave the video game industry?
I don't even know. But you know what? I like a lot of the games that they've done, so
Right.
I shouldn't say anything.
But my thing is, like, in the 80s, Warner bought Atari, and then they spun off the arcade division of Atari, and then they sold Atari. And then, like, 10 years later, Warner got back into the video game industry with Time Warner Interactive, and then they merged with Atari Games, the arcade division, and then they sold all that to Midway. And then, like, 15 years later, they bought Midway, and they got back into the video game arena, and now they're like, no, we're done with it again. We don't want any of this.
Yes.
It's just I don't understand why they can't just commit to something.
Maybe if they sell it, we'll get another new Gauntlet, though.
Right?
That'd be nice. Yeah. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into the topic at hand. This week, we're talking gaming prototypes.
Yes.
We're going to cover all of them ever.
All of them,
In
including the one that was just put on Stadia.
We should have. I do want to give some scope here. This is just kind of a brief look at some of the more notable prototypes of retro games that have come to light. This is really just us off the top of our heads selecting like a dozen of them that we were like, oh yeah, we know these ones. There was no real rhyme or reason because as you would imagine, the game of the world of prototype games is massive. There's got to be thousands of them.
This was mostly just about us exploring the ones that we personally found fascinating that we know of.
Right. And a lot of them are for things that like just weren't localized or things.
Right.
So it's there's a lot of things that could fall into this banner. This is just some that we chose that we wanted to talk about. We did get some listener feedback. First up is Rygar Starkong, who says The Alligator People is a 1959 film about a woman searching for her missing husband.
What?
She tracks him to an old bayou plantation in Louisiana, only to find out he's been experimented on and turned into a human alligator. Great flick, highly recommended for a rainy Sunday afternoon watch. Anyway, fast forward to 1983, 20th Century Fox develops a video game version of The Alligator People
Right.
for the Atari 2600, but doesn't release it. In the game, you play the main character of the film, represented by a syringe moving through the swamp, which is represented by constant moving green walls.
That sounds like Atari.
Once loaded with the antidote found in the swamp, you must navigate the upper and lower portion of the screen to prevent 6 green people that will transmutate into alligators.
Yeah.
To make matters worse, you are also being chased by actual alligators through the swamp. It's actually rather well done and pretty fun to play.
Now I just want to play that.
When I started reading this feedback, I was like, what is happening?
That's the correct response.
Deltron03030 writes in, it's still pretty interesting we're finding prototypes for Atari NES, SNES, etc. to this day. Finding that SimCity NES prototype was pretty cool, as was the Moonwalker one with the Thriller song for the zombie level.
Right.
These found prototypes make me wonder what's still out there undiscovered, especially in the vaults of Sony, Nintendo, Capcom, Sega, etc. And then finally, Andrew Park 800 writes in, there is this amazing homebrew hack out there of the Shinobi arcade game for the Genesis. It's missing a few things like ninja magic and boss battles, but it is an example of what could have been. Shinobi in the arcade was one of my all-time favorites, and while it was released for Master System, it suffered in the translation. Yeah. I guess it makes sense that Sega didn't port it again when the Genesis was released, figuring that it was old news. Hopefully, this gets finished.
Right.
So let's kind of, I do want to categorize the types of games we're going to be talking about, because again, a game prototype can be any number of things.
Anything.
We're going to be looking at unreleased games.
Yes.
These are games that were never released, but prototypes eventually became public.
Right.
We're going to look at unreleased ports and localizations, so games that came out in some regions, but their ports or localizations were scrapped for whatever reason.
Right.
And early versions, which are in-development builds of commercially released games that show different ideas or design choices that never made it to release. This is the one we're not going to cover
Not today. Right.
because this is really its own entire category.
Right.
Of
Like pre-release content.
game prototypes.
And
so we're going to be doing unreleased games and unreleased ports and localizations. Early
Right.
versions we're going to do
some
other
probably.
time.
We could do a dozen episodes just on the 16-bit Sonic games early versions.
I'm still holding out hope that one day they'll find that prototype of The Legend of Zelda, that really early one in the screenshots where it was like a side view.
Right.
Then we'll do an episode.
Yeah.
And of course, this is not inclusive. Not everything's going to be covered. We're just again covering a variety of things. But there are really great websites where most of this information comes from that you should be aware of. They are Hidden Palace, The Cutting Room Floor, and The Lost Levels, which are where both of us were searching for this episode.
Right.
It is a huge, massive community-run resource of game prototypes with very deep, nitty-gritty technical information. And those people are wonderful for doing what they do, and you should support them in any way you can.
Yeah, all three of those websites are excellent resources for this. I know I personally have a bad habit of finding a wiki and then realizing that it's 4 a.m. because I have tried to read every page on it. And these are really engrossing websites like that to fall into.
Yeah. So let's get into the actual games we're going to cover. We're going to start with Final Fantasy II on the NES, which was obviously put out by Square. And Saturn, I'm going to let you go through on this one because I'm unfamiliar.
Yeah, so this, I had no idea that they had even considered a Western release of Final Fantasy II on NES. But it makes sense. Final Fantasy on NES was moderately successful. As successful as an RPG should have been at the time. Right. And Square had just opened their North American office. They had just released the first Saga game as Final Fantasy Legend on Game Boy. They had either just released or were about to release King's Knight and Rad Racer 2 on NES. So they were starting to get some groove going.
Right.
And according to Square's then localizer, Ted Woolsey, the original plan was to bring all of the Final Fantasies to the West. And at a 1990 trade show, possibly CES, but I couldn't find any definitive confirmation, they did show Square's upcoming lineup, which included Final Fantasy Legend 2 on Game Boy, which did come out, but with drastically different box art, as well as the NES game Final Fantasy 2, which they had subtitled Dark Shadow over Palakia.
All right.
Which I guess kind of makes sense in the context of the game, but that's still just the lamest subtitle.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, at the time, the release of the Super NES, as well as the Japanese release of Final Fantasy IV, ended up canceling all of the other NES Final Fantasy games in the West, and Square decided to shift towards the Game Boy and Super NES games instead. And at the time, it was just not known that there even was anything in progress by anybody outside of Square and probably Nintendo. There was a famous fan translation of it in 97, 98, something like that. And that's how most people played it, if they played it at all. Until 2003, when a prototype for the localization happened to be released by the Lost Levels. And it featured a rudimentary English script, as well as several graphical changes that were in line with Nintendo's content standards at the time, like getting rid of crosses and stuff like that. So it's neat to see this mostly completed version of a game we didn't even know that we were supposed to get.
Right. And it comes from that era where, I mean, like you said, there was little information that there was little indication they were even working on it, but there's kind of little indication that anyone was working on any game at that point in time.
If it didn't show up in Nintendo Power, nobody knew it was going to happen.
This is our pre-internet world, so there's little indication of basically everything.
Right.
We just had a lot less information to go by. Next up, we have SimCity on the NES, which is based on the PC game of the same name and kind of related to the Super Nintendo game that released instead of this version.
Right.
It was announced at the same time as the Super NES version and even made a playable appearance at Winter CES in 91.
Right.
Before, of course, being canceled. Also announced in Nintendo Power in February 91 alongside another to-be-canceled game. What was that?
We'll talk about that next.
Know? Oh, is it the next one?
Yes.
Okay. Two playable prototype carts showed up at a used game store in Seattle in 2017, and they were later taken to the 2017 Portland Retro Gaming Expo, where one sold to a private collector, and both were thankfully dumped for preservation, which is something maybe we should mention that a lot of times private collectors buy these prototypes and they refuse to dump the ROM because they're worried it will devalue their cartridge.
Which is the dumbest thing.
It is. And if we're being honest, it probably does devalue them a little bit, but they're still extremely valuable, often one-of-a-kind collector's items.
Right.
But thankfully this one was dumped for preservation.
Also, they discovered that because they were able to dump both of them, they were able to discover that they were identical to one another. They weren't different builds.
But the game features unique gameplay, as many, but not all of the tiles are 2x2 instead of 3x3, as in all other versions of the game. Also, it has an original soundtrack by composer Soyo Oka, who also wrote the very beloved SNES SimCity soundtrack.
Yeah, and if you haven't played the ROM of it, go find it. It's actually really neat. It's obviously not completed just yet. There are some issues, but it is still mostly playable, and the soundtrack on it is great. It's a really nice soundtrack. The only song that overlaps between the two is the Metropolis song.
Yeah. Saturn, tell me about Earthbound. Wait a minute, we got Earthbound.
Yeah.
It came out.
Oh,
I
then let's
remember
skip this one.
All right, we're done.
So yeah, this was the other game that was announced in that February 91 issue of Nintendo Power as coming soon. Obviously, it was meant to be the English localization of the Famicom game Mother, which had released the previous year in Japan. And they were calling it Earth Space Bound as opposed to the Super NES game that was just Earthbound. And then it was canceled shortly thereafter, and everybody just assumed that Nintendo gave up on it. And then years later, the Super NES sequel was translated as Earthbound. So for me, as a person in America at the time without access to Japanese news, I just thought the NES game was canceled permanently and eventually delayed until it became a Super NES game. I never even realized that a NES game had come out in Japan at that point.
Right.
So I just assumed that it was the Super NES game. However, once emulation and everything got more popular, people started working on fan translations of it and trying to get it playable. In 98, a listing on a message board offered Earthbound NES cart for sale. And there was just this picture of this old prototype cart with just a handwritten label that says Earthbound NES. And it was purchased from that message board for $100. The fan translation group.
Oh, man.
Right? Neo Demi Force, who is a fan translation group, they had also done the Final Fantasy II translation that I talked about earlier. They were already working on a translation of Mother, but upon hearing of that prototype, Demi, who is the main guy from Demi Force, he raised $400 with the help of the Earthbound fan community to rent the game from the new owner and dump it for preservation.
And again, I want to pause for a minute and reiterate, that guy made them pay $400
to rent it,
to borrow the game. Yes. Just to dump it. Whoever that person is, fuck him.
Right. He had just paid $100 for the game, and then he charged $400 for access to it.
Asshole.
Yeah. And when it was released, the ROM image of it, a lot of people claimed that it wasn't a prototype, that there never was a prototype, that Demi just wanted some money, and that was just a fan translation he had made. And he was just trying to raise some money for it. There were some issues with the ROM when you tried to play it in Nesticle, which was at the time the prominent NES emulator, because Nesticle was not a perfect emulator by any means. So it would trigger all the anti-piracy messages and freeze the game and lock it up. So Demi ended up hacking the prototype to get around those and added the word 0 to the title screen to differentiate it from the sequel, which was eventually called Earthbound.
Right.
In addition to the fully complete English translation, it also had some quality of life improvements like a run button, and it had several changes that fit with Nintendo's content standards at the time, again, like removing crosses and such. They took away the cigarette from the smoking crow, so that now it's just a crow with its hand out. Like, what's the point?
Like an idiot.
Right? Over the years, at least 3 more Earthbound prototypes have been found. No noticeable differences between the ROMs has been discovered yet. They seem to all be functionally the same. And of course, in June of 2015, Nintendo released the prototype on the North American and European Wii U eShops as Earthbound Beginnings, with no alterations whatsoever from the prototype ROM that's been floating around on the internet all these years. Mm-hmm. They didn't even bother to change the title screen to match their new name that they gave it.
They didn't even pitch in on the $400 to rent it.
Right? Seriously, what dicks? They probably just took the ROM from the internet too.
Assholes.
Nintendo. But at least that finally proved that it was not a fan translation and that he wasn't just fucking us around about the prototype all these years.
Right. Next up, we're doing Bioforce 8, which I'm so excited about. This was on NES. It was put up by Seta.
Uh-huh.
It was first announced publicly in August 1991 issue of Nintendo Power, and it was touted as being just around the corner.
Yeah.
Several more previews were shown in Nintendo Power, hyping the game up before it was announced as canceled in the April 92 issue.
Yeah.
So after years of speculation and in-jokes, a collector named Paul Brown on the digital press forums in 2005 showed pictures of a proto-cart and screenshots of the game itself for the first time since Nintendo Power in the early 90s. Right. So then everyone wants to buy this guy's game.
Yeah.
After many offers to purchase the prototype for up to $2,000, he showed some more pictures revealing that the game was just a hoax, followed by a picture of the cart smashed to pieces.
And one of my favorite pictures that he showed off to show that it was a hoax, that people were still believing might have been the real game, was after they had eventually offered him $2,000 just to borrow the game. He posted a picture of supposedly in game of what might have been a shit monster or something, saying, I don't care if you have 2K monies, you get nothing. So like he made it as obvious as possible, and people were like, no, I think that's still the game. I think that's it.
In March 2010, a real prototype showed up on Yahoo Auctions in Japan, and it sold for 250,000 yen, which was about 2,700 American dollars. The prototype was sent to a preservationist. The ROM was dumped on the internet for everyone to finally enjoy.
Yeah.
And finally, we could enjoy Bioforce 8,
How is
which
it?
people thought was bullshit. It's okay.
Yes.
I mean,
It's almost okay,
it's kind of like Werewolf,
right?
you know.
So, better than Cheetahman, but barely.
There you go. What's Saturn? You want to do Days of Thunder?
Yeah, so this is the one we talked about last episode in the news.
Yes.
This was just recently discovered. Fragments of the code for this NES game were found across 40 floppy disks. And though this game was canceled, but another game of the same name was released by the same publisher shortly after cancellation. This one was apparently being developed in the US, and the one that was released was being developed in Australia. And I haven't been able to find a ton of information since this is still a new story, but a small print run of the canceled game is being produced with proceeds going to the widow of the original programmer, who is still working in a hospital herself at the age of 65. So that's a really good story that people are sending some monies her way in exchange for her husband's code.
And the programmer, I forget the gentleman's name. I had it written down, but it's gone now.
Right.
He was pretty prolific. Like, he worked on a lot of stuff,
Yeah.
a lot of Apple II stuff,
Right.
Specifically.
Yeah, and I really, really hope that the content holder for the film Days of Thunder doesn't try to come after this little tiny print run.
I like to hope that maybe they'll change the name up just enough.
No, they're even using like box art that was shown in previews that would have been for this game.
That seems a little dangerous.
Yeah, a little.
Next up is Space Fantasy Zone, PC Engine CD, put out by NEC Avenue. It was announced by them as coming soon to the PC Engine CD ROM, and the game was a mashup of Sega's Fantasy Zone and Space Harrier,
Yes.
which sounds awesome.
Right.
And it was previewed in the December 91 issue of EGM before it was canceled by NEC. Neither Sega nor NEC Avenue ever commented on why. It's been assumed that it was due to the impending release of the Sega CD, so maybe they didn't want to cannibalize or something. Who knows?
I believe we call it the SegMeg around here.
Yeah, the SegMeg. The prototype that's since leaked online is mostly complete, but there's a bug that allows shop levels to be skipped, allows levels to be skipped by entering the shop, and most of the music is gone. That said, it's a very fun game.
Yeah.
I really like it a lot. I got the version from PCE Works. I have a little Space Fantasy Zone poster on my wall. It's a pretty fun game. Yeah. I'm also a big Phantasy Star fan, so of course I'm gonna like it.
Fantasy Zone.
Fantasy Zone, pardon me.
Yes.
I also like Phantasy Star, Saturn.
That's unrelated.
Okay, I can like both. All right. Excuse me, Fantasy Zone.
It is a shame that so much of the music is gone, because that was one of the big selling points of PC CD games at the time, was the music, awesome soundtracks. So I'm a little sad that didn't survive, but at least the game itself is mostly playable.
Yeah. Tell us about Phantasy Star Soldier.
So Phantasy Star Soldier is not related to Phantasy Star. I just want to get that right out of the way.
That's ridiculous. This makes no sense. Video games make no sense.
It was just a Western localization of Hudson's 92 game Star Parodier that was intended to release on the TurboGrafx CD or Turbo Duo. It was going to be published by TTI, who was publishing all Turbo Duo games at that point. We don't know exactly when TTI planned on releasing the game, but it was likely canceled due to the low sales of the Duo. And also TTI eventually went out of business in 95, so that also contributed. In the prototype that is leaked to the internet, the title screen has the new logo for the new name, Phantasy Star Soldier. And also all of the story and cutscenes have been removed. The voices have also largely been removed. However, the PC Engine shaped ship was not changed at all for the Western localization. So,
well, Saturn, if they change it to a Turbo or a Turbo Duo, it would take up the whole screen.
The whole fucking
they have
screen.
To keep it. They have to keep it tiny.
So we don't know if there was any plans to change any of that, or if it was just still in early development.
Yeah. I'm also going to let you do Lufia and the Fortress of Doom, because I don't know a damn thing about it.
Well, first of all, I love that whole series. So Lufia was a Super NES game that was released in 93. However, Taito was advertising heavily in magazines a Genesis port of it to come out in December of 94. And then after it did not come out in December of 94, Taito released a follow-up ad that was literally the same ad with December 94 scratched out and Spring 95 written over it with the tagline, "It's worth the wait."
That's one way to recoup some ad revenue or some ad expenditures, I
Right.
should say.
Spring 95 would have been after the Japanese release of Lufia 2, so this would have been pretty late. This is a couple of years after the Super NES version. Taito commissioned the work out to a Western developer. They didn't actually bother to try the port themselves. And the Western developer sub-licensed the work out to at least 2 different companies before even trying to do it themselves. And they never had any input from the Japanese development team.
Goodness.
A prototype was recently leaked by one of the Western developers in 2014 is when it leaked. And it features only a title screen and a test dungeon with almost no collision data. And that's it. No,
boy.
no battle screen, no menu screens, nothing. It's just the blandest,
Just some art you can move.
pretty much. And according to the guy who leaked it, Taito had been banking on the game to be a huge seller in 94. They were banking so hard that they ended up losing a few $1 million on the failed
Oh
port.
my God. That's a lot of money for a JRPG in the 90s.
Yeah, for a JRPG on the Genesis in the mid 90s.
But to be fair, like Sega wanted JRPGs
Sure.
so bad.
Yeah,
They
in
wanted
Japan.
it so bad. Yeah, true.
But this wasn't even being advertised as being released in Japan. It was being advertised under the Western name exclusively in Western markets.
Weird.
Yeah.
Next up, we have Clay Fighter 2 Judgment Clay on the Sega 32X, put out by Interplay. I love Clay Fighter. It's the first video game I remember beating.
Yeah.
I remember I beat the last boss in Clay Fighter, and I was like, oh my God, I beat a game.
I remember we left the title screen running on Clay Fighter for like 20 minutes just to listen to the terrible music. And we were like, yeah, there's voices from our Super Nintendo.
It's so dopey.
Yeah.
It was announced around the same time as the console launch and advertised in some magazines, but quietly canceled against 32X game.
Right.
A prototype dated April 95 was found and dumped in 2018, and the game is barely playable. Most of the graphics aren't in place, and it's just super duper pre-alpha build.
Right.
A 3DO version was also announced, but no prototype has been found as of yet.
I really want to see shitty 3DO Clay Fighter.
Yeah, so we ended up not seeing Clay Fighter again until N64.
Yeah.
Would have been the next one. And I think the last one. I don't think they made another one.
I believe that is
after
the last game.
Yeah, unfortunately. It has such legs. A game where you can be a snowman punching a ghost.
Yeah. Or
What's not to love?
yeah. Or a blob punching Elvis.
There you go.
Or that one opera singer.
And we saved 2 of the big ones for last. I'm going to let you dig into Resident Evil.
Yes. So this is a Game Boy Color port of the first Resident Evil. It was announced alongside the Game Boy Color port of Street Fighter Alpha back in 1998. It was even shown in some advertisements alongside Game Boy Color ports of Street Fighter Alpha, Ghosts and Goblins in 1942. The release
Game Boy Color port of Street Fighter Alpha.
Have you played it?
I've played one of the Game Boy Color Street Fighters, but I don't know which one.
So there was Street Fighter 2 on the black and white Game Boy, which is almost unplayable, but it's like it's clear they tried, but they didn't know what they were doing.
You know what? I think mine was Alpha because I feel like I remember Guy being in it.
Yeah, Street Fighter Alpha was a surprisingly competent port, but all of the sprites are like super tiny.
Yeah.
My favorite part about it though is the first time that I tried it in an emulator. I was trying it with a friend of mine, and he and I constantly played Street Fighter. And every time that we would start playing Street Fighter, before we could start the game, he would immediately go into the options menu and change just like his entire input. So like the entire controller was wrong by the time he would hand it to me later. And so I pull it up on this emulator, and I'm like, "Do you want to try it before I do?" And he says, "Sure." And he immediately goes into the options menu, goes to the buttons, and just swaps A and B. And I'm like, really? That was worth it? He's like, it's important. It's important.
I remember playing it because I remember the American version didn't have, this is totally a tangent now.
Yeah.
But Katana wasn't renamed. It was still Sodom.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember that being weird as a kid.
Yeah, I think that was the only Nintendo version of Street Fighter Alpha where he wasn't renamed, because Super NES he was renamed.
Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
tangent.
Yeah, so they eventually pushed back the release date from 99 to 2000, and then it was eventually canceled in March of 2000. prior to its cancellation, there were several previews shown. Magazines praised the developers in their attempts to port what was still at the time considered an impressive 32-bit CD-ROM game onto the 8-bit Game Boy Color until it was canceled.
Yeah.
In late 2011, a collection of dev units and internal documents and prototypes was purchased in Leeds in the UK from an unpaid storage container. Just filled with a bunch of old video game stuff, and among them was a prototype of the Game Boy Color Resident Evil port, and it looked like a black and white Game Boy game cartridge with just a handwritten label that said Resident Evil, so everybody assumed it was Resident Evil Gaiden, which was released.
Right.
But no, it was the prototype of this. And around the same time, another anonymous collector said he'd allow a Resident Evil prototype to be dumped at the cost of $2,000.
Fuck you.
And nobody knows where he got that one, but he had it. The ROM that was found in the unpaid storage container was very unfinished. You could only play as Chris Redfield with infinite ammo. But the prototype from the anonymous collector was far more complete. It had both character scenarios. It had some story elements. It still didn't allow the game to be completed, but you could play a lot of it. Both prototypes have debug information that is at the bottom of the screen all the time. Another completely unrelated prototype of Resident Evil for Game Boy Color was found in 2018. This version wasn't sanctioned by Capcom, but was just a tech demo by Climax Entertainment to pitch a Game Boy Color demake to Capcom. And it looks much better than that original version did, but it's completely unplayable. There's not even any character art in it.
What was with them wanting to port popular PS1 games to the Game Boy Color? Like, I have Metal Gear Solid on Game Boy Color.
Yeah.
Like, what a weird, and then they wanted to do Resident Evil. Like, the stuff that got ported to Game Boy Color was so... There was also the unreleased Game Boy port of Diablo.
Yep. Yeah. Well,
Game Boy had some weird shit.
Well, Game Boy had a really long lifespan, and
True.
In the late 90s, the Game Boy Color was pretty much the only major handheld console. There was the Neo Geo Pocket Color, but it wasn't really popular outside of Japan.
Yeah.
So if you wanted international attention, you had to go Game Boy Color. You just had this massive hardware discrepancy between the current consoles and the Game Boy.
I'm just constantly blown away at the shit that is on Game Boy.
Yeah.
It's nuts.
Right.
Finally, we have StarCraft Ghost, which, at least for my money, is probably the most famous example of a canceled game and prototype.
Right.
Because it was just such a big deal.
Yeah.
I used to see StarCraft Ghost listed alongside Duke Nukem Forever for many years.
Yeah, right.
In lists you'd see in magazines and stuff.
Right.
And of course, Duke Nukem Forever unfortunately did eventually come out.
Yeah. It just took forever.
It was announced for PS2, Xbox, and GameCube, and obviously put out by Blizzard Entertainment. It was announced in September of 2002. It was supposed to be a third-person stealth game based in the StarCraft universe.
Right.
So, to my knowledge, would be the first non-RTS StarCraft thing ever.
It would have been the only non-RTS StarCraft thing. And also, this was just a couple of years after Warcraft Adventures was announced and canceled, which was supposed to be a point-and-click adventure spin-off of Warcraft.
Were there prototypes of that, or like it was in development, right?
Yeah,
like,
a prototype was found not long ago. Just
I've seen screenshots and it looks real dumb.
It looks so bad. It looks like a CDI game.
It does.
Yeah.
I thought it was like a joke mock-up someone made, and I was like, they were gonna make this?
No, you can find old magazine previews for it where they show those exact same pictures.
Oh God.
Yeah.
StarCraft Ghost, after years of delays and rumors, the game was finally officially canceled in March of 2006.
Yeah, 4 years later.
4 years later.
Yeah.
In January of 2020, this year, a playable prototype was found on an Xbox dev console and copied over to play on a modded Xbox 360.
Yeah.
Several more videos eventually leaked, followed by the compiled game itself, showing a fairly late in development with at least some playable environments and near complete cutscenes situation going on. So it kind of makes me wonder why They canned it. Did they ever
Right?
say?
No, I never saw anything official from Blizzard saying why it was canceled. It just the best they ever came up with is it didn't meet their standards.
The only thing that I can think is that third-person action stealth game in 2002 probably seemed like a good idea,
Right.
but a year or two later, the market was flooded with them.
Oh yeah, because 2002 was right around or right before when Splinter Cell came out.
Yeah, and Splinter Cell busted that nut wide open.
Oh yeah.
And there's also no way in hell they would have made it better than Splinter Cell,
Right.
Especially Chaos Theory was huge.
Right. Also, by the time they did cancel it in 2006, isn't that after World of Warcraft came out?
Yeah,
So-
I believe so.
So they were already making all of the money in the world. So they didn't need additional money at that point. So
They're already making we can hire Mr. T level money.
yeah,
They didn't give a
Right.
fuck.
yeah.
But what's funny to me is in my head I always feel like this game came out because for some reason PNO3 came out and I conflate PNO3 and StarCraft Ghost all the damn time.
Let me assure you, as somebody who owns PNO3, it's not Blizzard quality.
And for years, I remember thinking that, oh yeah, when they renamed StarCraft Ghost to PNO3 and released it anyway, it was like my head canon for years. But StarCraft Ghost was a big deal from a big company,
Yeah.
and people were very excited for it.
And then very upset when it kept not coming out.
Yeah, but hey, World of Warcraft, we got all this money. We don't need you. We're done.
That's how I felt because I was a big StarCraft fan, and I was also a fan of third-person action games on consoles. So I was excited for StarCraft Ghost. Like I was so ready for it when it was announced. Like I was like, this is going to be one of the first big games I buy of this generation, and then it kept getting put off, and by the time it did get canceled, I was just pissed at Blizzard because there was no new StarCrafts. There was no new RTS Warcrafts. Like, what were they even doing with all that money that I gave them years ago?
Yeah. So as far as final thoughts, now that we've covered all of gaming prototypes ever, I do think game preservation is a really exciting and noble and poorly paid job. It needs to continue happening.
Yes.
I'm very grateful to all the people and organizations that continue their work, raising money and piecing together these games that would otherwise just be lost to the ether.
Right.
People like the websites we mentioned earlier, people like Video Game History Foundation, all these great groups that are working tirelessly to give us the option to download and play some junk for 5 minutes.
Right.
And these guys slave over it for months and months at a time and spend lots and lots of money just so that we can be like, oh, this sucks. No wonder they canceled it.
And it's not just the ROMs that they compile and make available. You can also find from all of these organizations, Video Game History Foundation, from Hidden Palace and Cutting Room Floor and Lost Levels, you can find tons of early marketing stuff, not just stuff that went to magazines for marketing, but internal marketing stuff that went to like distributors and went to retailers to try to convince them to carry a product. And and you can find just nuggets from the early formative years of the game industry that that would otherwise be lost to time. And personally, I find that stuff just infinitely fascinating.
Tasty game nuggets. So that's it for gaming prototypes, at least for now. Maybe one day in the future we'll do one on
all of the Sonic 3 prototypes.
Early versions. Yeah, that would be an episode in and of itself.
Right.
But it is that time of the month where we thank all of the wonderful people who support the show over at patreon.com/retrowarriors, where you can get lots of cool stuff, and you should check it out, and you should also rate and review the show.
Yes.
But now's not about that. It's about reading whatever these people wrote. So without further ado, we would like to thank the following people. A 3-boobied woman from Total
We're
Recall.
off to a great start. Adam Williams.
Alex.
Alistair Downs.
A Marlin.
Anders Dahlqvist.
Angle Zebra.
A Sphincter Says What?
Austin Wheeler.
Billy Richardson.
Blaster Keaton.
Bob, episode 8 isn't good, and Dragon Quest 11 is great. You should get it.
Brandon Johnson.
Brian Kim.
Brian Guido Hassin.
Burger Champ.
Captain Koloff.
PC McGinty.
Chris Hickson.
Chris Minochi.
Chris Ruppersberg.
Chuck Angeline.
Cokelicious Crisp.
Copious amounts of drugs.
Craig C.
Chris Forbes.
Dadcore.
David Martin.
David Nethery.
Dig Dougie.
Dildo Hands.
Dr. Jason Tharp.
Dr. Mario's Pierogi.
Ebucel.
Edward Majewski Jr.
Eric G.
Floopy Noopy Noops Esquire.
FreeCodeCamp.org. Quincy Larson.
Garrett Roberts.
Gary Heather.
Gary Harris.
George McBain.
Giuseppe Got a Big Dong.
Gold Leader.
Grady Haynes.
Our producer, Guy Johnson.
Harry Pry.
I Hate Trog.
We know. Ivan Cervantes.
Evelyn Belchev.
Jackass Miyamoto.
Jacob Zelga.
Jason Frednick and his frog Fred.
J-Dub the Gamer.
John Fry.
Jurgen.
Justin made me buy 2 CRTs.
Carl.
Keith Courage, a.k.a. TurboGrafx fan.
Keith Reynolds.
Keo Killa.
Lachlan Heatherton.
Leo Lobato.
Logan Sharp.
Mark Meredith.
Martin Burke.
Metroid Prime, the whole game.
The whole
supports
game.
us on Patreon.
The whole series. Michael
Yep.
Dutro.
Michael Castro.
Michael Hawes.
Michael Cabetti.
Michael Winters.
Mike Morse.
Mike Rochezitzi.
Millie's homemade ice cream is the best ever.
Impits.
Mr. Jiggy Fly.
Neil Hayes.
Nick Brown.
Nick Mellon.
Novocaine FS.
Pig of the Sounder.
Please fart firmly and clearly into the mic.
Pogs are back.
Poop ass.
Puff Puff, please.
Retro Video Game Zone Jason.
Rick Jackson.
Rob Powers.
Robert Blackhall.
Robert Vieira Jr.
Scott Page.
Sean S.
Sharp Cheddar.
Sean Gavin.
Sean Schaller.
Special announcement, next month we're having a dildos episode.
Only one. Spokes.
Sponsored by Honest Bob's Dildo and Butt Plug Emporium.
Glad you got all the dildo ones this week. Steve Duke.
STG the Mr. Guy.
Sufferum.
The captain of a ship is in charge of the ship.
Good news. That's good information.
Excellent.
The Techno Funk Boy.
The New Craft.
The Watt 624.
Tiger Driver.
Todd Bass.
Tima Hughes.
Uwe Boll.
Thanks, Uwe Ball. Video Rangers
That's what
Podcast.
he's doing with his money these days. Vitamin Day.
We are having issues, Justin. I think we need a counselor.
What is a name? A miserable little pile of letters.
William Owens.
You and your friends are dead. Game over.
You wouldn't download a
I
penis.
might. Zach, huge thanks.
And Zach Huge Thighs are all the people that support us on Patreon, and we thank them very, very much.
And those are clearly their real names.
Those are all their legal names. If not, that would mean they are liars.
What?
Saturn, are you calling them liars?
That's impossible, sir.
That would be disgusting. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. Again, if you would like to help the show out, you can do so on Patreon, or you can also rate and review us on iTunes or your podcast aggregator of choice, or do both. I'm not stopping you. You could do both if you want. And I
He's
don't know,
not your
maybe
real
you got,
dad.
maybe you got a lot of free time or something, and you're like, I'm going to rate this show, and I'm going to give him $1 so I can
Yeah.
listen to Talking Wizards, where Andrew makes 90s your mama jokes most recently.
Yeah. I love the
Anyway.
picture you used for that episode.
I
So
just
great.
searched 90s moms. Anyway, thank you for listening. And as always, let us cling together.